All right, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. This is a presentation that's done live, but it's also streamed afterwards. If you're not watching it live, we're going to wait a couple minutes for people to get logged in. So we're just going to kind of have some questions that people had sent in advance. So we'll wait just a couple minutes and collect some of the questions. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the comments field, and you could type questions there throughout the Google Hangout. If someone wants to be so kind as to, as we're kind of going through different topics, if you're watching it live or offline, if someone wants to be kind enough to kind of do an index of the different topics that were covered, it's often helpful for people to want to kind of jump to particular questions, people that had sent them in advance. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So if you're watching it offline, we often wait about 5 minutes or so for people to get logged in. So we'll do that, and then we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions that have been sent in and some questions that come up. All right, so we see some people logging in. We have Axel from Ireland. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And once again, my name is Greg Undo. I'll be broadcasting tonight from Northern Virginia. So we'll go ahead and get some questions. We had a lot of questions sent in advance, which is always helpful. We'll take a look as we go on. So all right, hi Patrick from Oz. All right, so we had some more people logging in. It was kind of about 2 hours before we even did a Google Hangout. We got a thumbs down, interestingly enough. All right, hi Shane from Los Angeles. Good to see you online. Hi Carl from South Africa. That's great. Thank you for the kind word on the videos. I'm glad you find them useful. All right, so we have some more people logging in. And if you guys have questions, I know we had some people that had typed in some questions in advance here, but we'll go through those. But for those people that are just kind of joining in now, if you have particular questions, please feel free to type them in. Okay, good to see you, Larry from Denver. So as I'm doing the presentation, there is a bit of latency, about 10 to 20 seconds. So if you type something, from when I'm talking to when you guys hear it, there is a bit of a delay. So we'll try to accommodate that as well. So just kind of be aware of that as we watch this. And once again, for people that are watching this offline, we do this live. You can send in questions to the channel. But we'll also, go through, and you can do that in advance or just kind of watch it. And once again, if someone wants to take kind of meeting notes of topics that were covered, I'll be happy to kind of go through some of those different topics. And we'll see. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes, maybe about 2 more minutes. See some more people logging in. If you just logged in, if you want to, feel free to in the comments field in the chat area, if you want to just do a quick introduction. It's always interesting to me to see where people are logging in from. So, all right, it's a couple more people logging in live. So appreciate you guys coming out. All right, and we'll get started here. Can you guys hear the audio okay? Well, periodically, like 1 out of every 5 Hangouts, the audio just doesn't work. So I think it's working okay here. I kind of have another laptop that I use to kind of monitor the comments. All right, I'll just turn my volume down here. All right. We'll wait another minute or 2, and then we'll get started. And once again, if you guys have some questions, we'll be happy to kind of go through some of them. I'm just going to create, for the first question, I'm going to create a little part here really quickly. And we'll get this set up for our very first question. All right, glad that the audio made it all the way down to Australia. All right, I'm just going to set up a quick. Okay, so I see your question, Alan, about rendering MIDI parts from a multi-timbrel virtual instrument with separate outputs. Okay, I'll put that in my list. Get this going. Okay, we'll talk about some MP3 exporting capability. Okay, let me just go back. Just kind of keeping some notes here. All right. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with the Hangout. Thank you all for joining in from around the world. It's always a pleasure to do this and help some people out. So we had a number of questions that were sent in advance, and we'll kind of do some of these. We'll try to maybe couple some that kind of make sense together. One of the questions I got was kind of a notation question, from last month after the last Hangout, was if we have a part that looks kind of like this in notation, and maybe we don't want to necessarily write out every single part, but we wanted to indicate it as a trill. So, and if we kind of look at a part, a lot of times you may have to physically play a part, like this. So let's say we'll just solo the editor here. So as we do that, and if I wanted to, when we look at it in notation, sometimes the string players could get very annoyed if you write that out like 18,000 times. So if I wanted to just kind of come here, I think if we go to the score menu, we could just simply build a trill. Let me just go to my functions here, I think. So if we just kind of right click here, we can now say we just wanted to build a trill. And since it's kind of a trill right there, we could now just have the trill automatically notate it just like that. So that's one easy way of kind of being able to do the trills to make it a little easier to notate. Okay, seeing just a question that came in about, can a channel EQ be placed after plugin inserts, or is it pre-inserts with the ability to change the routing, any workarounds? Okay, so we'll take a look at that, Shane. Let me just jot that and copy it into my notepad. Okay, we had another question of someone that wanted to take a number of virtual instruments and be able to kind of stack them, but have it go directly out of one voice. So let's say if I wanted to layer maybe a piano, and let's say to layer that with another voice. Some people will copy the events multiple times. One trick that I like to do in layering MIDI voices together is to use a send effect. So one of the things you could do with MIDI track is to actually use a send effect. And what you could do is, a lot of times this will allow you to say, okay, I want to take this piano and I want to run it as the basis for an arpeggiator and send it to a completely different device. But if you choose no effect here, you could now just come here and say, okay, I just want to take this device here, and now you could layer kind of multiple sound sources. So we'll just kind of turn this on, and then you could layer different instruments just using the send. So you could send out to different instruments that are active within your system. So using kind of the MIDI sends for that is like a really handy thing to do. So if I don't have it soloed, we could probably hear it. So now the piano is actually playing the guitar part, and you could just layer other voices. This way you could edit one particular part and have that send out to 4 different destinations if you wanted to. So that's kind of an easy way to be able to layer sounds quickly. Now we had a question, if we start off a new project, we had some questions regarding, I'll just do a brand new project here, of some of the differences between track instruments and using a rack instrument and using a multi-timbrel instrument. So I'm going to just go to my VST instruments, and I'm going to start off with a track instrument. Starting off here, let's say with my, like the included Hallian Sonic SE. And this is a 16-part multi-timbral instrument. And then it also has 16 stereo outputs that are available within the instrument. So kind of the heritage of why there's a difference between a MIDI rack instrument and a track and a MIDI and a track instrument is The MIDI rack was kind of the original concept where it could have multiple outputs as well as multi-timbral capabilities. But some people switching from our programs could get really confused because they just wanted to have one sound, one stereo output. So we added the capability of having a track instrument that was very simple. So if you have something like just a Rhodes or a piano patch that doesn't have or really need a lot more than stereo outputs, at that point, what you could do is just simply save it as an instrument track, and it's very fast to load up, and it consolidated, like, you know, the audio characteristics as well into the instrument. But sometimes if you start off with a multi-timbral instrument, in previous versions, you couldn't really then, if you loaded up like a quick drum program and then you wanted to add to take the snare out to a different output for independent processing, you're kind of stuck. So you could paint yourself into a corner. So now if we do this, and I believe it's changed with Cubase 7.5, that if we start off with an instrument track, where this was before one stereo output and one MIDI channel, even though this instrument has the capability of having 16 MIDI channels. So if I wanted to kind of alleviate that issue, one of the things you could do is just go to your output bus here, and you could activate all of your outputs if you wanted to, or if you wanted to deactivate your outputs, or you could do it kind of independently if you don't want all 16. So now we could have multiple outputs, and we could do this from the instrument rack itself. But now if I wanted to have the ability to access these other 15 MIDI channels that this one instrument can handle, instead of opening up 16 different instruments, now once you have the instrument track selected, and if we add MIDI tracks, we can now just say, okay, I want to add 15 MIDI tracks. And as we do this, it's automatically, because we had this selected, and it's going to my Halion Sonic SE on port 1, now this would automatically go to Halion Sonic SE channel 2, channel 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you notice that as I select, that we could actually see the selection. So that's automatically incrementing the MIDI channels and keeping the same ports. But we could also see the selection reflected here in Halion Sonic SE. So if I just come here and just navigate, at this point, if I have different instruments loaded up, you have that capability to just say, okay, I want to access this instrument. So even if you started with an instrument track, whereas before that could impose some limitations on you, now you could just simply add additional MIDI tracks directly by selecting that. They'll be added directly into the system and activating your outputs from the VST instrument rack or from the inspector as well. Okay. All right. So I'm just kind of going through a couple other questions. So I see a question from Shane. He says he spent a lot of time customizing keyboard shortcuts, preferences, plugin manager, and the color palette. Can I save these settings to move them over to Cubase 8.5 when it becomes available, or just to back up? So these settings are all saved in your application data folder on PC, and it's stored in your library folder on the Mac. One quick way to see this information is if you go to, on a PC, if you go to all programs, and let's say if I wanted to come over here, I'll say, okay, I want to go to my Steinberg Cubase 8, you'll see this thing called the user settings data folder. So once I click there, this would take me to the location, and it's stored in the application data folder. So it's kind of independent of the program files directory. So this is kind of all your different presets that you'd have for, you know, your colors and everything like that. Now, one of the cool things that happens is once you update to future versions, what's always happened in the past, and I'm sure it'll be the same, I haven't seen anything future yet, But what you're able to do is the program will actually look to this folder because it's not stored within the program files. And then it will automatically extract all that information and migrate it to the new version. So if you are working in Cubase 8 and you have everything set up exactly how you want, when you just open up Cubase 8.5, all those settings will remain intact. And that happens like 99.99% of the time. If that doesn't happen, all you'd have to do is simply copy the contents of this folder, and you could go back one level, copy the contents of this folder, and then paste it into the Cubase, whatever the next version or future version would be. So if you wanted to migrate your preferences from 7.5 to 8, you would just copy this folder and copy all the contents and paste it there. But it does a really good job of being able to look into your previous versions and automatically extract that, even if you uninstall the program. That's, since it's stored in a kind of independent area, it'll just look to those files to automatically carry that information over. So that's what always happens. So, all right, so let's go look at some of the questions that were sent in. I had a kind of an interesting question. We had two different questions on transport behavior, and these could be handled with a preference. So let me just go back to a different project here, and we'll just activate this project. So one of the questions was when the person would hit stop with the space bar, that it goes back to where it originally started from. So if I kind of come here and I hit stop, let's say I'm playing my project, that you could have it automatically, and I may have adjusted this preference. So we'll come here to the preferences, and under transport, one of the things you could have is a return to start position on stop. And I believe this is the default behavior. So if I start playing my project and then hit the space bar, it goes right back to where I started playing. So, and sometimes that's really helpful, but sometimes you may want it to stop, and then when you hit the space bar again, to continue on. So if we go to the preferences and we just simply say we're going to uncheck return to start position on stop, we can now just kind of click here, hit OK. And if you wanted to actually just kind of change that behavior with a keyboard shortcut, if you come here to the key commands, and this is a helpful thing. I know sometimes when people are writing and doing mixing on a vocal, they may want it to jump, but you would actually find that command under preferences. So once you kind of scroll down here to plugins to transport, you could just simply return to start position on stop, and you could have your own keyboard shortcut to kind of toggle the behavior of that. So, all right, Tony Ray Jones, good to see you online. All right, now the other question that someone had is, it's a lot of times when we're working with our preferences, we could, one of the other preferences that a lot of people like is, when they want to just kind of change the playhead. A lot of times people go directly to the cursor, the timeline here. But you may want to actually just be able to kind of click and double click in a very particular location. So if I wanted to go to my preferences, under transport preference, again, we could say locate when clicked in empty space. And now if I wanted to play here, I could just kind of double click and start playing from any particular position just on an empty space right there. Now, one thing that some people had asked about, when they see the rewind and fast forward, we see kind of a default speed for this. If you wanted to go faster, what you could actually do is just simply hold down the shift key, and you could adjust the speed of that. So you have kind of the normal fast forward and rewind, but holding down shift kind of turbo kicks it in, just like that. And you could set the amount of that again in the preferences under the transport. So if you wanted to just come here, you could set the wind speed option, so you could have it 4 times faster, 10 times faster, whatever. Yeah, we're. I see a question in that we're still on. Yeah, so I'm showing Cubase 8 Pro, but a lot of the things that we'll see are still available in 7. So, all right. So let me go through the list of some other questions that we had sent in. All right, so we had a question about MP3 export that was just in the comments field here. Let me just review that really quick. All right, so the question was from Martin about quality mode while exporting MP3, good or bad. You know, MP3s are, you know, going to always be kind of a compressed file format. And once you kind of, you know, have your audio mix down, I would always suggest doing kind of a full export, you know, at the highest bit depth and highest sample rate that you're using for your project. If you've recorded your project at 44.1 or 48, it's not really going to make a difference in the quality if you export it at a higher sample rate. But, you know, I would always kind of choose to do the export at the highest resolution and have a file of that. I see a lot of people, when they're done with their project, they just export it as an MP3, and then they're like, oh, it doesn't quite sound exactly the same as it did in the studio. You know, and while the MP3 compression algorithms continue to improve, you know, if you don't have to compress the file contents, I think most of us have hard drives now where, you know, having a 50 megabyte or, you know, 100 megabyte file isn't going to break your hard disk. But I would choose to do the kind of the highest bit depth and have a high resolution export. And then if you need to send it to someone, at that point you could, you know, export it as an MP3. But there will be some, you know, sonic differences. It may not be super apparent if you listen to it on like laptop speakers, but if you you know, really compare the two critically, you know, it's pretty apparent for a lot of people. And you always want to have kind of the best quality. So, you know, if you have kind of the high resolution file, you could always render that to different compressed formats for emailing easily or playing on your phone or distributing via, you know, Amazon or iTunes and stuff like that. But, you know, always try to keep the highest resolution if possible. All right. All right. So I think we have rendering from like multi-timbrel instruments. So we'll cover that in just a couple minutes. Okay. Let me just kind of go back to my notepad. We'll just add a couple of notes that have come in. All right. So we had a question on how do you do step input in Cubase, and this is kind of an old school way of inputting MIDI data. So a lot of times when people you know, had difficulty perhaps playing, or if they're working in kind of a notation view, they might do something as like a quick entry, doing, especially if keyboards or drums isn't your primary instrument, they may want to do step entry. Now, once we kind of do this, now step entry is actually determined by your quantize field here. So if I want to put in eighth notes, I could do this. And we see this little icon here. So you may notice these little icons in the MIDI editors. One kind of looks like a little staircase. And I'm going to just come here and I'm going to open up my virtual keyboard so you could watch this. And I'm going to just say, okay, my play position is at measure 12. Now, as I hit a particular note here, it will just automatically, let me just place it in my files here. So as I would just kind of hit a note, it would automatically advance to the next eighth note. Now, one of the tricks to do if you're running into this, where you go, okay, if I wanted to start over again, and if I wanted to put in a rest, let's say, so as I come here, you can say, okay, let's just hit a note. We'll go to the next eighth note. But if you hit the right arrow key, you can now, with this, I'll just turn this off real quick, but if you hit the right arrow key, you could advance to the next step. So if you need to put in a rest, we could do this. So now, as I hit a single note, it'll automatically place these into step entry mode. Now, sometimes some people may just hit one note in and place it into step entry mode, and then you may want to just simply change only the pitch. So if you wanted to, you could just say, okay, I just want to record the pitch, or I just want to change velocities, or my release of velocity, my note off velocity. So if you wanted to go back and record one single note and then go back and say, okay, I just don't want to record the pitch at this point, you could just change the pitch or just change the velocity of the different notes. So a lot of people would do kind of step entry, and there's some people that feel that doing step entry would actually, actually has a different feel than playing it in manually and quantizing it. So a lot of people kind of doing old electronic music prefer the feel and can feel the difference of doing everything in step entry. So it's just kind of the feel. So, that's kind of an interesting tactic that some people do. Some people think it's exactly the same if you play it in and quantize it heavily. So, so something to be aware of, being able to enter step entry mode. And you can do this within the, any of the MIDI editors or within the score editor. So a lot of notation programs often will put in values kind of using step mode. So all right, let's go through some of our questions that were sent in. I'm seeing just a couple comments, like from Shane, if it looks blurry. Sometimes when we're doing the live things, it could be the internet speed. I'm kind of watching on a different screen, so sometimes kind of refreshing your screen might help if the image is looking a little blurry on your end. So that's something worth trying out. Okay, and we had a question of like different tools in 8 Pro for Vari Audio that's not in 7. One of the things that's really handy in Cubase 8, and we had a couple questions on this, is in working with, if we have like a vocal file, and a lot of times, like when I'm doing vocals, and sometimes like when I get files to mix, people are doing a lot of heavy compression. So if I wanted to listen to my vocal file here, what did you say? And a lot of times I may get files from people that have like breaths really accent because they may have tracked with a compressor. And while it, may have given a nice even performance to and regulated dynamics of a particular file, one of the things that can often happen is that you could have breaths really kind of, brought out. And sometimes, breaths are nice, and I don't choose to eliminate breaths often, but when it's something that sounds like this. What did you say? You wished it all away, So a lot of times I may get a vocal file like that to edit, and what I want to do is to just simply take the volume here, the clip volume, and be able to adjust this. Now, one of the questions that we had earlier was, okay, I want to be able to adjust the volume on a clip. So we see that anytime that an event is selected, that you'll have this capability here of being able to adjust the clip gain. So we could go to additional 12 dB louder here, but if we select the info line and we have this clip selected here, you could actually just choose to adjust the volume up to 24 dB of gain. So that's one quick way of it being able to adjust the volume. If we grab the pencil tool, you could also just draw directly on the events here and have access to your volume, and you could do volume changes. So that's another question, since we're here, that would make sense. But now if I've done this editing and I've done all the breaths, one of the things that's been incorporated is a new render in place function. So I could actually just select this event, the track, and you could do this for the track or for the events. I'm going to choose the track here. I'm going to right click, and when we go to render in place, I'm going to say, let's go to my render settings. At this point, I could say I wanted to include the channel settings, which would be like my inserts and send, or my inserts, my channel strip, as well as the channel EQs, or if I wanted to include the sends and the complete signal path, or if I wanted to include the master effects. I could say, okay, I want this to be as one event, or I want it to be multiple events. And if I have the track selected, I could actually say remove source track. So if I've done like a lot of edits, specifically with like doing like a lot of work on taming breaths and stuff like that on my vocal, and I don't want it to be kind of one mouse click away from completely screwing everything up, I can now just render that, and we could just take this particular file here. And what it's done is it's just taking that file, and now it's made it one file, and it's one contiguous file. So at that point, we could have control over that. Now, we could also do this for instruments that are going to different MIDI tracks as well. And this is where it gets to be really handy. So if I wanted to take, like this fretless bass sound is coming from the Halion Sonic SE, and I wanted to have a different sound that was coming from, let's say this guitar part is coming from Halion here. But if I wanted to take kind of these different events, so say I select 4 non-contiguous events here, and then I could right click, and again we go to render in place, and what I want to do is come here and I say, okay, I want these as separate events. I want them to be the complete signal path, and I want to mute the source events. Now, since I have events selected on the timeline, I don't get the option to remove the source tracks, but I could just come right here and mute the source events. So as I do that, I could just say, okay, let's just render that. And it's going to take each of the files, and it's going to actually extract the color from the original part. And then we had it automatically mute the original data so we don't have it playing back twice. So at this point, we could see that we have the files rendered here as audio, places it directly underneath the original track, and also allows the color to be extracted and the original parts can be muted. So I could have this as one contiguous part or separate parts. So you could select multiple events and have it rendered. So whether you're doing, instruments like from Contact or Sample Tank or Halion Sonic, you're able to kind of do all the rendering. So that's one of the things that's been added that really kind of makes a significant workflow enhancement. Now, one of the things that's also been added is this capability here to see all of your VST instruments and your media bay directly on the side. And this could be hidden by just coming here and holding down Alt-T. And if you hold down Alt-Control-T, you could toggle back and forth between the media bay and your VST instruments there. But that's a really handy thing to be able to have kind of your VST instruments always kind of logged in and accessible right there. So those are a couple of the things that have been added. And there's kind of a wealth of other new features as well. Okay, so let me just look through some of our questions here. We had some other questions kind of come in. So some of the things, we just a quick question about the difference between Cubase Artist 8 and Cubase Pro. So Cubase Pro is more comprehensive. It's going to have additional effect plugins. It's going to have more comprehensive scoring, more mixing capabilities with the control room, as well as surround sound. So those are a couple of things, but as mentioned in the field, you could actually, if you go to the Steinberg website, there's a very detailed comparison, so you could actually see what the differences are, what you get with Cubase 8 versus Cubase Pro 8 versus Cubase Artist. One of the things, if you start off with Cubase Artist and you really need a feature at any time, you could just upgrade from the online shop as well, which is really handy. So if you're in the middle of a session, you're like, oh, I need to vary audio for doing vocal tuning. At that point, you could just say, oh, I could just buy the upgrade, and then you could just download the code and it'll immediately be unlocked with for you. Okay, so I'm seeing a question about kind of boxed WAV files. So I think maybe if we take a look at this, we kind of see this boxed WAV file. And I think what this is, if you go to the audio menu, we could say like events to part, and that might get rid of it for you. So I think that might be kind of what you're doing. So, there's two different ways of looking at your audio events. You could have a part or a setup to do, some other functions. So you could have a part editor, or you could actually have an event. So you could actually kind of toggle back and forth. So I'm not sure if that's what you mean by the box, but maybe that'll help. So I'm seeing some comments there live. All right, one of the other things that's really handy with the Cubase Pro 8 that's been incorporated is the ability to work with tempo handling. So if I wanted, let me just find a quick project here that'll make sense. So one of the things that was incorporated first with Cubase 7, I believe, it might have been 6, was the ability to kind of automatically extract tempo information from parts. So if I have an event here, let's say a MIDI track, and we listen to it, and let's say I put the click on, sometimes you may notice that this doesn't have a correlation to the bar and beat. So if you run into this scenario, you could just simply select the event, and then go to the project setup, and then or go to the project menu, and then you could say tempo detection. And as you do this, it can analyze. And now when you look at the event, everything can be aligned on a grid, and we can see all the tempo changes laid out for us right there. Now, if we have a multi-track project, we could also do this, or even a single track project. So let's say if I wanted to do, I think I have like a jazz piece here. Let me see if I can find it. Try to do something that's not a publicly released material, so YouTube won't go crazy on me. All right, so let's say if I have an audio file here, one of the things that's really handy, and let's say this isn't necessarily following the click track. Again, if you go to the project menu, I can say let's do our tempo detection. And now we could have the tempo map automatically extracted. Now, one of the things that's really handy also is this ability to say, okay, we see our tempo map and the variations going on here. And if we wanted that tempo map to be altered, but still kind of keep the pitch the same, what we could do is select this event here. We could select a 2-track mix. And then once we go to the audio menu, we could go to advanced. And then as we go to here, we can say, let's set definition from tempo. So a lot of times audio files may have one stagnant tempo metadata, that's like a tempo stamp. So what I want to do is to basically, and what we can do here is say, okay, I want to take this, all the tempo information, I want to embed it within the file itself. So now, if I wanted to play this at different tempos, I could say, let's just take this part of the file and speed it up. We'll zoom out a little bit here. Or if I just wanted to draw in tempo changes here on the fly. And you can do this for multi-track or just a single track. So if you wanted to slow down a track. Then we go back to the faster tempo, or you can say, I like this tempo, but let me just slow it down, but keep the relative relationship between it. So you could have a lot of free reign with the tempo detection, because it's going to be kind of significantly more accurate, because you have each beat, the tempo information for that beat associated within the audio file itself. All right, let me take a quick look through some of the, so I see questions or solutions to mapping multiple parameters to macro controls in Pro 8. I know some people have set up the quick controls to, I think, I'm not positive if this works, but we can set the quick controls to do the particular function. I think you might be able to, once you go into your device setup here, and let's say once you go to the VST quick controls, that you could set up the same, I could be mistaken on this, I don't have a MIDI controller hooked up, but if you learned a function, that you could learn the same controller for the different quick controls. So I think that's something to try if you wanted to try to have a macro control for different parameters that adjusts like multiple parameters from one knob. So that's something to do. Okay. So I've seen the question, we'll do this with all audio tracks, or do you have to lock them to the tempo somehow? No, it could just do that freely. So if I have a multi-track project, I'll just kind of show this here real quick. Let me just find a quick project here. I might have to open it up. Let me just. me see. Okay, it might be. Okay, this project here. So, and you could do this again with a multi-track as well. So I'll show this project here. So if we have, just remove this track. So let's say if we don't have a tempo track for this, and what I could do is now just kind of set one of the tracks, and often you could use drums, or you could use like overheads or whatever's kind of giving kind of the rhythmic source here. So in this case, I'll just kind of use a mandolin, and then, you know, if I want to go to my project menu, I think I could actually even access it directly from here. Now I'll just go to my project menu real quick and choose the tempo detection. So as we kind of look at this,
turning Japanese, I think. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
now as it does this, it'll insert since it's figuring out what the beat is, it'll automatically insert a 1/4 measure. So say if I just listen to the count in from the singer.
1.
So we can say, okay, right here,
1.
I want to have this be my 4/4 bar. So we'll just click right there. And now, once we have this,
Japanese, I think. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
so now we know what the tempo is. And just like I did on the single audio file, I could select all of the audio files. And this is the trick, to select the audio files and go to advanced again, and we'll say set definition from tempo, hit OK, and you'll see that as soon as we see this little indicator here in the upper right hand corner, at that point
1, 2, 3, 4.
I could now just have my free tempo, so I can speed up. Or if I want it to be kind of a steady tempo, I could just turn my tempo map off, and then you could just say, okay, I want it to be even, and this is roughly where the tempo is. Or if I want it to be faster. And you could adjust the tempo. So this has really saved a lot of sessions for people. So it's kind of an easy way to be able to, you know, if someone, you know, you have this amazing recording and all of a sudden, you know, they sped up, you know, this one part a little too much at the end. They got a little anxious or just slowed down, and, you know, coming out of a particular drum fill or something like that. You can just go back and change it without really having really bad artifacts from that. So. All right, let me look at some of the other questions that were sent in. Thanks, everyone, for, again, hanging in there and watching different questions. All right, so we had a question on how do I set up a project to be stored as a template. And this is a very handy little trick to know, because you could kind of just start off. Okay, so before I get into this, I see Tony's comment. So I could just add drums with Easy Drummer to that. Now that I have a click embedded, would it match up? Yes. So if I wanted to come here, and this is another question that we'll just kind of turn on, so that we'll go through. So let me just turn this on. I'll go back to kind of I'll undo a couple of my bad tempo changes here. But if I wanted to just open up a particular instrument, and this is one of the questions also, so we'll cover this, like, you know, if you wanted to, like, the question was, you know, originally, if you wanted to have Groove Agent, what's the difference between Groove Agent SE and Groove Agent, the full version? Is it worth the upgrade? Definitely worth it, just for the fact that Groove Agent has 4 different agents that could work simultaneously. So if I wanted to load a kit here, and one of the agents that you have is the percussion agent, So at this point, I could just say, okay, I want to load a kit with patterns, and we're going to choose from our percussion agent, and I'll just put in like a little, we'll try disco craze. So now your drum programs will automatically lock to the tempo. So if I just kind of play back the particular pattern here, we could just say, okay. And I'll make this just a little bit louder here so you could hear this. So, and I'm going to tell this to automatically follow the transport. So now we could just have this percussion follow. And I'm just going to make it a little louder in the mixer here. Or if I wanted to add just a simple, another agent here that's just maybe from, we'll just do from our studio kit, let's say. Okay, so I'll just choose my studio kit. And at this point, I could load this up, and you can have multiple agents opened up. And these will automatically just follow the tempo. So as soon as you just kind of hit play, and I could go to my agent mixer here. And let me just start a pattern here on this agent. But so now you can see that all the different drum parts will automatically just kind of locked in. So it's just a really super handy thing. So, you know, I see so many people when they're doing sessions, they make the musicians play to the click track because it's really easy to do editing and have everything aligned to the grid. So when we're kind of doing that, what you could actually do now is like, especially, and I think Tony does a lot of singer-songwriter work in Nashville. He does like really phenomenal work. But you can have the singer-songwriter kind of play with their natural tempo, and they can speed up and slow down. And that's, you know, going to be like, you know, how music really feels. Even if you do an analysis of like great disco songs that everyone dances to, or classic songs everyone thinks the meter is perfect, you do an analysis and the tempo is fluctuating and it breathes. So now what you can do is have the, you know, have the parts follow the real musician, instead of having the actual, you know, musician follow the machine. So have the machine follow the musician. So I'm seeing a question from Shane is, can you take it further and bounce with a better time stretch algorithm? So I think it's one of the preferences. Let me just check here real quick. Excuse me. So we say, okay, we want to do editing, and I think, so you say time stretch tool algorithm. I want to say that it might be, you know, the real time. It will when you do the bounce down. I know it generally takes the, you know, the higher quality algorithm as opposed to the real time algorithm. And I think that might be dependent upon the algorithm that you choose for the particular file. So if you come here, I think if you just switch the algorithm here, that when you render the file, it will use this algorithm as opposed to the real-time algorithm. So you can just kind of get that set up there. I'm pretty sure that's how it's set up. I could be mistaken. But I think that'll do it for you. All right. Take a look at some of the other quick questions. Yeah, and one of the things like with Groove Agent, and I see this question from Tony is, so once we have the MIDI files as wave, you can bounce them as waves, but you could actually just kind of take. And one of the great things with Groove Agent is you had a capability of just kind of taking, because we have the grid lined up here, I could just take like the percussion agent pattern, and you could record this in real time. So if I have Groove Agent set up, I could choose my input to be from Groove Agent Kit 1. And as I record this,
Turning Japanese, I think.
and let's say I'll just have the percussion.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And you could switch kind of different percussion patterns. So now I've recorded that MIDI information, and let's say I just have it split directly here. And if I wanted to turn that into audio afterwards, and again, this is for any VST instrument, I could now select that. And just with one mouse click, I can say, okay, let's render settings. I can say, let's do the complete signal path, and I want it to be one event, and then just choose render. And now I could take that virtual instrument track here that's going to my percussion agent. At that point, it's now going to render it directly below as my audio file. And if I need to change the tempo in the audio file after, I could do that as well. So once you have this done, it's now just going to render that file, place it directly underneath, and you can see the audio rendered directly right there. So very easy to kind of just, select a file and then just turn it directly, into audio. So yeah, so you don't have to, I see your comment, Tony, that within the Easy Drummer, you bounce to wave and then import it back into the project. So, but just simply do that, and I think that'll kind of consolidate your workflow because you don't have to worry about placing it in the project in the right time position. All right, so let's take a quick look at Loopmash. We had a question on. So we'll show you this. And Loopmash is kind of an interesting instrument. So let me find a particular file. And Loopmash is like a really fascinating instrument because you can do stuff with that that's really hard to do with anything else, and would often take long times to work with. So Loopmash started off as a way to kind of mash different loops together, hence the clever name for the plugin. But then, and that came in version 5, and I think in version 6.5 it added the capability to have different kind of play effects, almost kind of like DJ style effects processing. So if we come here, let's say if we have kind of maybe something like a more dance-oriented project. So I'm going to open up my mixer, and I have Loopmash just on the master bus here. And I could place this on, particular channels. I'm just putting on the master bus for demonstration purposes here. So as we work with this, there's a new Loopmash FX. So the full Loopmash will allow you to do quite a bit of different things, and I'll show that after. But the really cool thing that I love about Loopmash is just this plugin, because they've taken kind of the different play parameters, and you notice that this looks like a particular piano keyboard, so we have C, C sharp, etc., F, F sharp. So we could trigger this from MIDI or just within the plugin itself. So if I wanted to come here, I could choose my different time frames. So if I want to do like stutters, or if I want to do and you can change the pulse. So if you want to do like do stuff like this. And this is just playing this plugin in essence. So if I say, okay, let's just come here and or if you wanted to stall or I remember I kind of showed this once in New York City to Grandmaster Flash, to the notorious DJ, just a really sweet guy, and he just looked at me and said, I invented all that, right? We're like, yeah, we just want to make it easier for you. So you could treat Loopmash as just kind of an effect, but if I wanted to add like a VST instrument, what you could do with Loopmash, and you find this under synth column by default. We could just open up Loopmash here, and what Loopmash is going to allow you to do is to take, and you can start with some of the examples. So we'll just kind of start off here and load up different. Now, so you have kind of three different areas. So you have kind of your slice selection, audio parameters, and the performance controls, which we've just seen. So if I wanted to play back kind of different, let me just kind of take this out and we'll sync this. So let's say if I just play, what you could do is you could load up different loops, and you could drag and drop these loops from media base. So if you have like a guitar part, so say I want to take this guitar part, I could just drag and drop it. And what you could do is you have like one loop that's kind of the master, and you could have different numbers of slices. So you can say, okay, I want to adjust my number of voices. And this way you could actually just say, okay, I want to incorporate this guitar voice. And you can say, okay, I want now everything to follow the timing of the guitar, or follow the timing of different tracks. And you could have different scenes stored. So if I click here, just hit a MIDI note, and of course you can go to kind of your audio parameters and your performance controls. But basically you could take kind of one loop and extract the feel of that loop and apply it to other audio files. So if you're kind of coming up with different types of loops, so let's say if I want to drag a bass, it does an analysis of that. And now as I adjust kind of my slice priorities here, we could add more voices. Or if I wanted the drums to follow the bass, I click here. And you could just kind of come up with like new and really interesting ideas of taking and kind of mashing two different loops together. And we had a question on Spector as well. I haven't worked with Spector, one of the synths, in a long time. So I'm probably going to not do such a great job explaining it. It hasn't been one of the main synths in a while, but it's kind of came from a batch of synthesizers, and it's a little more tends to be a little more kind of atmospheric in sound. So if you wanted to kind of come and play different components here, but you could just even kind of just come in here and kind of draw in different elements of the sound. But really just kind of explore some of the presets, and you can see, I think this is one of my favorite Spector sounds. So I just want to come here, and we'll just add, we'll just arm this track for record, so that when we work on this, see if I've added, let me just add a MIDI track here real quick, and we'll browse. So now if I wanted to go to particular instruments, we could have that set up. But kind of play around with it. It's a little more ethereal and atmospheric, but it also has some really warm sounds as well. All right, so let me go back to some of our questions. Is everyone learning some things tonight? Okay, so one of the questions we had, and I meant to cover this a little earlier, was about doing templates. So if I do a new project here, now sometimes people will make a mistake of starting off a project and go, okay, I love how this is set up for my template, and I have all these different audio files. And saving a template is really easy. All you have to do is go to your file menu and say save as template. And at that point, that gives you kind of your starting off point. But one thing to be aware of, if you have a lot of tracks in audio files in your project, that if you store your that as your template, it's going to come up with all those audio files. So, and templates are really kind of very important to a lot of people, especially composers. They'll, spend months building up their template. But let's say if I just wanted to build something really quick. So if I wanted to have 8 mono tracks, I could come here. I wanted to add 4 stereo tracks. I always wanted to have, let me just place that starting here. We just add 4 stereo tracks, and I just use my mouse scroll wheel to increment. And I wanted to add, an instrument track of Groove Agent. And if I want to do that, and let's say, like I just built a template for the bass player Jeff Berlin last week, and he's like, okay, I want drums, I want piano, I want all this. So once we kind of had everything set up, now all you have to do is click on Save as Template. And this will include all the routing, everything set up. So we go to our file menu here, and we can say, okay, I just want to come here, and we'll call this Club Cubase, and we'll call it October 2015. So I type in my name of the template and hit OK. So now when I go to a new project, I could just go to my templates here and say, okay, now we just have this, and I have this prompted. And this is an important thing that a lot of people miss. So when we do a new project, you always have to be very cognizant and be very aware of where your files are. By default, Cubase will place it into a Cubase projects within your documents folder on your Mac or PC. I like to have it prompt me for file locations. And that's just a very subtle little change right here. So if I do that now, it'll ask me where I want to store this file. You could create a new folder, and then you could start from that template right there. So all the routing, everything will be intact. Now, another question I saw earlier, comment I saw earlier, is that someone said, oh, it'd be great if you could save like your routings and your VST connections. And if we go to the VST connections, those can be stored as well. So if you just kind of go to your outputs, let's say if that's what you want, at that point you could just click on the plus sign, and you could type in a name. So we'll just call this October 15. And then at that point, if you wanted to automatically just kind of jump between your different outputs, you could just store your inputs and your outputs together, or you could just store them independently right there, and you could have access to those particular routings as you see fit. So if you want to, let's say if I've changed my routing, the question is, it was typed in, was what if you want to save over the existing Cubase templates? Let's say you just want to edit their VST connections. And then all you'd have to do is, let's say, okay, I just wanted to change the output here of this track. And now what I want to do is, so when I go to save as template, I could just give it the same name, hit OK. It'll ask me if I want to overwrite the file, and I just choose overwrite. And then that template will be set up with all of your new information directly there. So, and I think you could do, and the question is, I see typed in, can you save over the Cubase presets? Yeah, you can do it as well. I believe it will be the same thing. So we see Larry has to get going. So thanks for participating, Larry. And again, you could watch the rest of it offline if you wanted to. Hope you learned some things from it. All right, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at, I'll go back to my questions that were sent in. Someone had asked kind of an interesting question about working with the chord tracks. And this is kind of a really cool area of the program if you haven't explored it. It's a really great compositional aid. But if we have our chord track set up here, sometimes we may notice that as we enter in chords, let me just adjust my zoom level here, that, sometimes like if you put in an F sharp, it may indicate it as a G flat key, or if you put in an A sharp, you may, so the enharmonic spelling of the chord may be off a little bit from what you expect. So, obviously you wouldn't think of G flat as being kind of the chord versus F sharp just because of where it falls within kind of typical keys being used. So someone wanted to know how to be able to change like these two scenarios to their different enharmonic spelling. So if I want to take the G flat and turn it into an F sharp, and the program will try to do a good job of figuring out the key of the material. But you could just have kind of the enharmonic shift here, and you can say, okay, I just want it to be F sharp, and I want my B flat to be A sharp, so you can kind of switch. And this is from the info line. So if you don't see that information there, you could just turn the info line on, and then you could just switch from automatic detection directly to the other enharmonic spelling of the chord. Okay, so we had a quick question in the mixer dealing with how to switch to different meter types. Because sometimes you could look at tracks that are based on different meters. So I'm just kind of reading through some of the comments here. Yeah, okay. Just make sure I'm not missing some points just on topics of discussion here. All right, so, as we're kind of working with different tracks here, let me just open up a particular track. Just jump back to our meters. Let me just find something with a little more audio in it. So we'll just come directly here to this file. And as we're kind of looking at the mixer for tracks, and I'll just turn this off for now. And let me just turn off the audio file that we rendered very quickly. So when we look at our meters, so we have meter bridge here in the top and a meter bridge just to the left of the particular fader. And there's different meter positions. One of the meter positions that's really handy to me is on the top meters, you could actually switch. If you right click in the meters, you could switch to wave meters. So you could actually see when tracks are coming in. That's really handy. Or you could have a straight PPM meter. Now, depending on your meter types, it could be affected. If sometimes when people are mixing, they may want to see the meters be on input. But if we actually right click here, you can say, okay, I want to see my input meters, or you could say your meter position, you could adjust to post fader or post panner. So just kind of right clicking on your meters, and you can do this on the fader type here as well. So if you go to your meter settings on the actual channel, you can say, okay, I just want to see my input meters. So if I do this and pan it, you may notice that the meter doesn't change here. But if I wanted my global meter setting set to post panner, Notice that the meters now reflect the panning on that stereo track.
Turning Japanese, I think. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So if I have this track panned all the way to the right, we would see that reflected in the meters depending on the meter position. So something to be aware of if you need to toggle between different meter settings. All right, let me go back to a couple of other questions. All right, so we had an interesting question on what re-record was, and this is kind of an interesting concept. We realized that sometimes when you're recording a session, that while you think everything is great, there's often many false starts in sessions. Sometimes musicians can be set up where let me just I'll just open up my template that we created, where musicians can be set up where all of a sudden it's like, they're not visually in the same place as they were in rehearsal, and maybe they're, a little scared being in the studio to start with. So a lot of times it could be a little intimidating for the experience. Now, one trick that I like to do if you're recording a large number of tracks here, let's say if I'm recording 8 tracks at a time, I like to come here and place these into a folder track. So I'll select all these tracks. I'll take the top selection, hold down the shift key, select the bottom selection, and then if you right click, I can say move selected tracks to new folder. And then I could kind of open and close this folder. So as I do this, I could also, if I wanted to arm every track within the folder, we could have that set up directly there. Now, a couple of preferences that could throw people off sometimes. One of them is like when you select a track, that you may notice that this track automatically becomes record enabled. And I have the monitoring set up to automatically kick in when that track is recorded. And these are just settings. And sometimes you may like that for a particular, if you're doing like really a lot of punches really quickly. But sometimes people don't want to accidentally record over an existing part. So if you go to editing and under project and mix console, you could actually take that behavior off here with this preference. So you go to editing, to project and mix console, and you can say enable record on selected audio track. So if I hit OK, now I could select the track without arming it for record. So one of the questions was, what does the re-record do? So let's say I have my punch in set for, and I'll just say we'll put it on, we'll zoom in here, right on measure 3. So, and we have like the click for the musicians, and we're just going to have this automatically do a quick punch in. So re-record mode, you can activate right here on the transport. So if I just come here, we could say we have audio record modes. So we could keep history. So there's a couple of different settings that you could kind of kick in here. But one of them will be the common record mode. So we want to do re-record. So as I'm playing, let's say if I have this punch in, let me arm tracks for record. That would help. All right. So now that I showed you how to unarm it. So I'm going to just arm the folder track, and that arms every track within the folder. So as we now just have this automatically set to punch in at this point. So now you see that my record enable light actually is changed. So let's say there's a false start. I can now just hit this button one more time, and it will just automatically erase the other tracks. Okay, they screwed up again. And it could go right from that start position and automatically just erase all the files. You could do, if I have it set for a count in, like a 2-bar count in, it'll just automatically, the drummer screwed up. And let's say, the bass player screwed up. And I just hit that record button again, and it automatically deletes it. So it saves like 4 or 5 mouse clicks in kind of the heat of battle. So re-record is kind of a really handy function for that. Now, one of the functions that was also asked about was, what's the difference between track versions and lanes? So this is kind of an interesting concept, because we kind of started off with lanes where we could have different takes automatically selected here. So let's say if I just wanted to do recording here, and at this point I just wanted to really quickly just say, okay, we want to do a punch in, and I'm going to place it into a cycle mode for 2 bars. So let's say I just place it into record. We'll take off my pre-counting. So, and then we're going to do several different passes here. Okay, say our second pass, our third pass, and our fourth pass. And we'll do one more. Now, as we do this, I can now just simply come here and say, okay, let's just open up the lane view. So now I could see, like on this particular track, I could see all of my different lanes. So this is recording 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can see my different recordings there. Now, if I wanted to select different parts from different recordings, I could just use my comp tool, which looks like a little hand. So that's really handy. And sometimes I really like the comp tool for doing vocal comps or doing like a guitar solo, kind of a single instrument. But sometimes it could get a little messy when I have this spread across 24 tracks for a full live band. And this is where track versions can come in handy. Now, if I've started in lanes and I want to take that into track versions, I could just go to my project menu, and we see track versions here. And we could think of lanes as being kind of where we could have different tracks all with the same settings here. But track versions we could think of as more parallel. But we could, since we started with lanes, and a lot of people are very used to working with lanes and prefer lanes, but some people may want to take the lanes and turn them into track versions. So I could just kind of select these. But if I want to do a track version recording, I could now, we'll just select this one particular file. And now I could just see my track versions here. So as I do a recording, let's say we'll do a punch out. Okay, let me just set it up. So I'll do a punch in and a punch out directly here. So we'll play. So now I could have, and I'm just going to take it off of cycle here for demonstration purposes. So I have my punch in and punch out. All right, now what I could do is, we see that we have version 1 here. And what I could do is say, I want to do a new version, and I can set this up for group editing. It's really handy with folder tracks because you have this group editing option. So I say, let's say, okay, we want to call this take 1. So I could just say new version, and we notice that all of my tracks disappeared. They're still there, but now I'm going to go to my track versions, and now I could just say, okay, let's do a second recording. Okay, and then you could also hit, I think it's Control-Shift-N, and that will give you a new track version as well. And we'll do, let's say, one more pass. So I'll do my punch in, punch out. All right, so now if I wanted to switch between these different track versions, I could just select one of the tracks and I could just have my different track versions. Now let's say, and we could actually see this reflected here, so if I have version 3, and this could be labeled, so we can say, okay, this is that track, this is that track name, we can say this is awful, this is terrible, bass was good, but at this point, you could just switch easily between these different track versions, and these are all parallel. But if you get to the point where you're like, okay, I really liked audio track 3 from take 3, I could take this off here and just switch that particular take to that performance. So at this point, we could have it work with different parallel tracks if you wanted to. So you have so if I'm working with large numbers of simultaneously recorded tracks, I like doing track versions. If I'm working with guitar solos or vocal comps, I prefer lanes. But once again, I could just say, okay, I have these track versions set up. Let me just turn those track versions into lanes. So I go to my project menu to track versions and say create lanes from the versions. And now when I come here, they're all set up in different lanes. So it's kind of you could work either way. So you kind of have the best of both worlds, where you could do a lot of different editing tasks and being able to record different takes very quickly. All right, so I see a question from Tony. It's like, when am I coming back to Nashville for a Cubase meeting? I think I'm planning on being there in December. But I'm going to be in Nashville for a clinic at Belmont on November 12th. I'm not sure if it's open to the public or for students, but if it's open to the public, we'll be announcing it in our email blast. But if you want to email me after, I should have an answer in the next day or so. So let's go ahead and go back. And again, if people have questions that I've missed, just kind of feel free to kind of reiterate it. I'll try to circle back. We have some other questions that were sent in. Let me go through those. Okay, here's an interesting question that someone had, where they were, as they're kind of working, and let's say if we had multiple events here, and let's say if I had I selected all these events, and let me just select these, and say if I hold down my Alt key, and let's say I make a copy and I place it here, and I make another copy and place this here. So we see that a lot of times when I select the track, that we could have our settings set up directly here. So if I have like this fader set for that particular track, and if I have the fader set here for that track and the fader here, that when I kind of toggle back and forth, that the inspector settings automatically kind of toggle directly based on the selection. But someone, I think we have a preference for this, wanted that to be able to change based on when selecting an event. So if you go to the editing menu and choose track selection follows event selection, at that point, if we enable that preference, if I select this part here, let me just turn off my group editing, sorry about that. If I select a particular part, that automatically selects the track for that part. So as I just select the event here, that the track selection is automatically following that. So that's a nice preference to be aware of when working with that. And again, if you like the preferences, or if you want different preferences for recording versus mixing, you could just store your preferences as different presets very easily. So, you know, like in my studio, I have mixing preferences versus editing preferences versus tracking preferences. So kind of depending on how you want it to work, it's a very easy way to kind of, you know, have things set up quickly. One of the questions we had was being able to kind of change the signal flow order. Let me just cycle back, like having the EQ before the inserts. Let me just cycle back here through the comments. And guys, if you guys have any, you know, questions, you know, please feel free to enter them in the comments field. Just cycle back. All right, so one question that I just saw in circling back, just read it one more time. It says, why don't Cubase play back at the speed it was recorded at? I record the project with a 10-channel independent record device, and I import it into project in Cubase. Why doesn't it play back correct? It sounds like it's a sample rate mismatch. So maybe if it's probably like, if it sounds like it's like one semitone off, but a little more, not exactly a semitone, it could be that it was recorded at 48K, and when you import it into Cubase, it's at 44.1 or vice versa. So one of the things that you could do is actually just come here and choose to, when you go to your project menu here, and we could do this and go to your project setup. One of the functions that you could do is just, here's where you could set the sample rate. So check to see that the sample rate here is what is actually on the audio file itself. And often you could see the sample rate for the audio file directly in the pool window. So if we go to your pool window here and we just kind of look at the audio files that you imported, often it'll just kind of give you some like really great information. So not only do we see the tempo, but we see it's 24 bits, mono, and I think we could see the sample rate here as well. Let me just, and we see the sample rate here at 48K. So make sure that the sample rate in your Cubase project is matching the sample rate of the recorded audio, and I think that'll take care of you. Okay, and then another question, when trying to replace audio and video file, keep getting the message, cannot remove existing audio stream from file. So when you go to import the audio file, again, you could, when you go to import a video file, it'll actually extract the audio from the video file itself. Now, one thing to be cognizant of, and this is thrown off some composers, because video files can have different frame rates. So if we import a video file, often, let's say if I just have this, I'm going to import the video file, and it will automatically extract the audio by default for the particular video file. So I have my audio file here with the video file. Let me just move it a little bit over to the right here so you can see it a little easier. Now, when you have that video file imported, the one thing you have to be very aware of is that video files can come in all sorts of different codecs and all sorts of different frame rates, and especially with HD video. So one thing to be aware of, and again, this is found in the project setup. So if we go to the project setup here, and so we say, okay, let's come here to project setup, is to make sure that your frame rate is matched. Sometimes, you might have, if you're doing high def video, it might be 2397 or 2397 drop or 30 frames. If you're in England, or in Europe, it's going to be 25 frames. If you're doing film, it'll be 24 frames. But the trick here is you could actually just say, get the frame rate from the video. So here I can see that this video is 29.97 frames per second. So make sure that you don't have a frame rate mismatch, and that the sample rate from the original audio is the same. And I think that it could be a sample rate issue for both the video file message that you get and for playing it back at different speeds. So just kind of be cognizant and be aware of that. Let me just, okay. So a question from Shane, who I think left, if I'm not mistaken. Can a channel EQ be placed after plugin inserts, or is it pre-inserts without the ability to change the routing? That's a great question. So let's say if I go to a particular channel, at this point, we can see our inserts in our channel strip. So if I have applied, let's say, an EQ position here, we kind of see this follow the signal flow. So we see inserts, channel strip, and then our EQ. Now the EQ position can be freely changed within a channel strip. And if you click right here, we could have the channel strip show up before the inserts. And if we want the EQ position to be at the top, and again, you just kind of click right here in this little position, you could toggle the signal flow. So if you want the channel strip, including the EQ, to come before the inserts or to come after the inserts. So it's kind of a subtle thing to do, but it's very powerful in the amount of flexibility that you have with that. So you could have a tremendous amount of flexibility where the EQ is, and I want this coming. I want the EQ coming after the compressor, but before so let's say the EQ is coming after the vintage compressor, but before my insert effect of, let's say another distortion or whatever, your amp simulator. So again, just that really subtle ability to just kind of toggle that behavior between the two of them. All right, so let me just kind of circle back. Okay, the question is, how do you draw a volume curve with the pencil on a wave track? All right, there's a couple of different ways to do this. Let me just open up, switch to another project here. And one of the cool things that a lot of people don't know about Cubase is if I come here, and let's say if I have a project, is you could have multiple projects open in Cubase. So if you wanted to, you could say, I really like this audio file from this project, or a number of different files. You could just kind of toggle the different window behavior here and say, I really like that audio file and I want it in this project. And you could just simply drag and drop files between projects just that easily. So let's say I'll go ahead and delete some of these audio files. All right, so the question is, how do you draw a volume curve with the pencil tool on a track? So there's a couple of different ways of doing this to quickly add volume information with tools. So one of them is, let me just jump to, let me find this project here. I have some audio on. Okay. So if I have my audio file here, one of the things I could do is just grab the pencil tool and just draw directly on the event itself. Now, if I wanted to do kind of a clip-based gain, once you select the event, you'll see in the upper center portion of the file where you could adjust the volume for that clip. Now, both of these methods with the pencil tool on the event, if I want to do kind of dynamic changes, or with my clip-based gain, and if I want to come here and just kind of say, okay, I just want that one section to be a little softer, you could do that. Or I want this to fade out. So if you come here, you could just say, let's just have that section fade out. Or if you want to edit the fade, you could double click in the fade region and say, okay, I want it to do this goofy fade out. So you could have that set up just that easily. So we could do this, and this all happens before the signal hits the mixer channel. So a lot of people, I have a friend that does a lot of work with David Foster, and this is like one of the reasons why he does all of his work in Cubase, is that he can have a tremendous amount of control over the dynamics and the volume before it hits the channel, and he could use the compressor to kind of for a special effect as opposed to doing kind of corrective tasks. So now if I wanted to have some other tools, so I have my pencil tool here, but you could also have different tools, including a line tool. And if I wanted to, we could draw in automation. So if I click directly on the left-hand side here, and if I wanted this tied to the mixer automation, so again, I could use my pencil tool on an event to draw in my volume changes. I could use clip-based volume changes just by selecting the event and going to the upper center handle. But if you click in the lower left-hand corner of the track here, you could see your automation lanes. Let me just activate this project here. Sorry about that. And now we're going to be able to draw in automation. So I'll just take this particular track here, and we could see what automation parameter. By default, it'll be volume, because it's the most widely used automation. And now, at this point, you could just kind of draw in volume changes directly on the track, and this will carry directly over to the fader for the selected track. So if I come here and go to my fader, and as I update, you'll notice that the fader will just change the position directly based on the event. Now, as I mentioned, you have different drawing tools as well. So if you wanted to do just a straight fade out, you could just grab the line tool. And if you want to draw in like a parabola to just kind of do a fade out just right there. Now, once you have the automation, a clever thing that you can do without necessarily having to, to a really clever automation handling trick is if you select the automation here, you could actually kind of just grab the automation and say, okay, I just want this to be, brought down a little bit, or I want to tilt that as more of a fade out, or I want to keep that automation curve but more of a fade in, or I want to compress or expand the existing automation. So the pencil tool can draw directly on the event. You have your clip-based automation, and you could also just kind of select the gain. So once you have that event selected from your info line up here, you will see volume, and you could adjust your volume directly there. So the pencil and the clip-based are before the automation. So you have kind of 3 different ways within one mouse click to have kind of control over volume changes. Now, another question we have from Patrick is, how do I reverse a section of audio without reversing the whole track? It's a great question. So I'm just going to revert this project here. So let's say if I have my track and I'm playing it here, I'll just grab my play tool. And let's say, okay, I just want to find so let's say, okay, I'll find kind of. So if what you could do is use the range selection tool, and you may notice that sometimes when you use some of the tools that it's like, oh, it only allows me to select an entire bar. Why is that? And that's because the snap is turned on, and you could turn the snap on or off by hitting the J key. So if I wanted to, I could just come here and say, okay, I wanted to just take a portion of the file. And at this point, you could right click and go to process. And at this point, it's going to just, and one of the functions that you're going to have here is reverse. So now when I play this back, and we'll just listen to this track here. Now you could also do some other interesting things. So if I want to just take that selection, and if I go to my plugins, I could just run it through different plugins as well. So if I say, okay, I just want to take that, and I wanted to run it through a reverb plugin, and let's say I have a really old computer and I can't quite have the reverb going in real time on this particular track, and I'm going to set my mix ratio here, and I could just process that audio now going through the reverb plugin. So if I play this. Now, a lot of people don't like to work this way, but because they feel it's very destructive. And, because once you do that, sometimes people feel, oh, I'm kind of stuck with that. And if I need to change the reverb in the mix. So what you could do, it's very interesting. This is a very powerful aspect. Even after saving the file, if I, put this song on a Dropbox account and someone downloaded it and they open up the project in Nuendo, if we go to the audio menu you can go to the offline process history. At this point, I can say, oh, I wanted to take that reverse that was kind of, basically, what most programs would consider a destructive edit, and I could just remove the reverse. But if I have other settings, I could just remove one edit. So if I did 7 different processes, I could take out process number 3 and leave processes 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. So you can have kind of a non-linear undo history. Now, let's say if I listen to that, I'm like, wow, I just wanted to change that reverb a little bit. One of the things that you could actually do is just choose to modify. And you can say, okay, I just want a little more high cut, and I wanted to adjust the mix, and now I could process that, and I could just actually just tweak that reverb so that when it's actually being processed, we could just replace that setting, and we could do all of your offline processing without any of the traditional issues where we could run into problems from doing offline processes. So I hope that makes sense for you, Patrick. But it's a really powerful thing. It's a really powerful editing aspect to have control over. Okay, I'm just kind of reading through some of the comments. So I'm reading from Real Raven 2000. For some reason, he's saying my imported WAV files appear to be locked for this, maybe because they came from Cubase Elements and had some processing on them. So one of the things that, if you wanted to send me a screenshot, I'd be happy to take a quick look at it. If you want to email me, my email address is gondo, almost like condo with the letter G, so GONDO @yamaha.com. So Real Raven 2000, if you want to email me a screenshot, I could try to take a quick look at it while we're doing the Hangout. And I see your question, Tony. It said, what about using reverb on the master output if the 2-track mix had no effects? Yeah, you could definitely do that. You just want to be careful, obviously, when you do that to, a lot of people add reverb and they put the mix to 100%, and all of a sudden, right, wow, it sounds like we're singing it in the middle of an empty pool. And it could sound really out of context. But yeah, you could definitely put just a little bit of reverb if something is like, very, very dry to kind of liven it up. So if you wanted to do that, you could place that reverb on the master effects send, and or the master effects is an insert, but again, just be very aware of the mix, but you could do that. Or if you wanted to do offline processing and selected, you could do it either way. So I see Real Raven, we'll do that now, and you have my email address. Yeah, so many people have done like offline processing and reverb totally wrong, and it's like, oh, great, so just, I'm sure you're aware of those issues. I'm going to take a quick look real quick to see if I've got a screenshot from Real Raven 2000. Let me just log on to my email here real quick while we're doing the Hangout. I appreciate everyone's patience. I hope is everyone learning some good tips and tricks? Okay, I haven't gotten an email yet. It might be just kind of downloading it. So I'll just check back with that. All right. All right. So I'll wait to see if I see the screenshot. Let me just cycle back, see if there's other quick questions I missed. And let me look through my document as well. Okay, one quick question that we had Two other quick questions. And I'll show one other trick that's really handy. Three things real quick, and I'll wait to see if I get that email. Someone had asked if they have a recording and maybe someone just kind of came in a little bit earlier, or a little early or a little late. How could you actually kind of adjust the audio easily? So a lot of times if you have an event, so let's say if I've cut an event here, and then at this point, one of the things that's really helpful, let's say if I'll just, for demonstration purposes, I'll just kind of erase the beginning and the end of this file. So let's say, the musician came in and he just like missed a downbeat. If you hold down, let me just find the, let me just see. I think I might have changed my default key command for this, but this is a really cool thing to see. So I'm just going to go to my tools, and let me just adjust my tool modifiers. All right, so I think it's Alt and Shift, but here it's on mine it's Control Alt. But if you have event, let me see if I get the keyboard shortcut correct here. Sorry. So I think it's usually Alt plus Shift, but this is a really great tool. So if someone comes in just like a little early, you'll see that the cursor will change, and then you could slip the audio within the event. And if you had like a fade in, again, you could just slip that audio. So if someone's just like, oh, they just blew the downbeat, you could just simply slide that audio to make it fit. And I'm seeing just while we're here, I'm seeing a question for any function about like a snap sync point to cursor. So when we go into and we double click, we could go into the sample editor. And one of the things that you'll see in the sample editor is you could have your snap point here. So at this point, you could move the snap point and have that automatically, and you see this little line here, and then you could have this automatically use that as the reference point to go on beat. So we see that not the beginning of the file, but this snap point. And if you wanted to move that snap point to the cursor position, you could do that as well. So if you just say move to cursor, you could now just have that snap point automatically. So if you have like a pickup note, like a da ba da 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 da. So it's a really handy function. Again, you just would double click, and then you want to make sure that you have the show audio event enabled in the sample editor. And once you have that turned on, then you could use that like a different selection of the audio file to snap to the cursor. It's kind of seeing a funny comment. If this was Club Avid, they would be charging us. Yeah, we like to be good guys and show you all sorts of good stuff. So I'm going to check to see if I got the email yet. Let me see if it's come in. Okay, I think it's just come in. Okay, so I got the email. Thank you for sending it. So I think if we just have this set, so right now if I have this selected here, I could see my different points, but you may have to, if I say events to part, I think this is what you have, and this is what it kind of looks like in your screenshots. So if you have that event selected, you could say dissolve part. So try doing that, Real Raven. I think that will do the trick for you. And then I think it'll make. I don't have my. I'm checking my email on a different computer, but if you could, I have like a second laptop that I'm monitoring the feed on. But try the dissolve part selected, and then from the audio menu dissolve part. And I think that'll do the trick for you. All right. Let me just check it out. See if there's other. I think there's one more point that I want to make. So again, slipping the audio within the event is very, very handy. Great feature for someone, that just kind of messes it up and screws it up. All right, so it seems like that did it for you, Real Raven. So now probably your whole life will make sense again. So I'm glad we figured it out for you. Let me just look at some of the other points. I think there's just a couple quick questions I wanted to go over. All right, so one question that was mailed in, it's kind of an interesting question, is with a MIDI part. And let's say if I had like different drums I wanted to use for snare and a different drum that I wanted to use for kick, like from different instruments. So when we come here, and let's say if I have a MIDI track, and let's say if I'll just add a quick rack instrument here of Groove Agent SE that comes with it. Okay, so we'll create the track. Now, one of the things that is a deceptively simple thing to do is to just automatically, if I have a drum selection here, and this is the included version, so I'm just going to load a kit, and I want it to be from my acoustic agent. I will double click here. And now one of the great things is you have drum maps, and drum maps are super helpful because what you could actually do is, and one of the great things with like Groove Agent is you can say create drum map from the actual instrument. It's going to extract where all the drum sounds are. So when I go to my drum editor, I could actually see, if I have events here, I could see that this is my different beginnings, and I could see side stick, kick, but if I have like kicks and side sticks, and I want these to go out to different devices. So let's say I want a snare from Groove Agent, I want a kick from Easy Drummer. So once you have the drum map defined here, and there's a preference, usually by default, where it'll automatically go into your drum editor. So if you have a drum map defined, and this is the critical thing, a drum map defined, and you go to the drum editor, you can now get kind of extended functionality here. So at this point, one of the things is, let's say, okay, someone gave me a programmed drum part, and all of a sudden they're like, what is their snare is triggering a hi-hat or a tom, and the mapping isn't working. You could actually have an in note and an out note. So if I wanted to take this, I could now just kind of say, okay, their C1 is going to equal a different pitch here. Now we could also say, I want this to be on different MIDI channels, or I will also want it to be going to different outputs. So I could say, I want this going directly to Groove Agent, I want this going to Easy Drummer, and you could break it up easily and kind of have it all within one single view. Now, something else that's really handy that a lot of people aren't aware of, if I have my drum part and I wanted to take each MIDI event and split it onto its own track, so if I go to MIDI and then we choose dissolve part, I can say let's separate pitches. And as I do that, it'll now just automatically create each of the pitches and map it to its own track. So it's a really handy tool for that. And I see a question from Real Raven, and I'm glad that worked for you. And what's the difference between part and wave? So you could have parts or events. So sometimes when, if we had parts selected, it would actually kind of launch different editors. So a lot of people, when they're comping parts originally, it's kind of an early Nuendo thing that's kind of carried over. So when you do this, you can see the part editor. So the sample editor will show the different events, but if I have different lanes, I could actually see this and see all the different events on that track within the part editor, as opposed to looking at it as an individual audio file. So it's kind of a not used as much with the comping tool and track versions, but it's a very powerful tool for kind of, and some people still are very used to working that way. Like Chuck Ainley does all of his vocals and his comps in the part editor, and he's just done it that way for a long time. He's really fast with that. So let me see. I'm just going to go through, see if there's any other quick questions. If not, we'll get wrapping up. So I get home, I could hang out with my family some tonight. We just see if you have a last minute quick question. Feel free to kind of fire it up. Okay, so there's a question. How about editing real bass part with a MIDI bass kick? Best way of lining it up. So one way of doing that, let's say if I have a bass part here, just for one of the things that could be really helpful, and we'll just kind of solo this. Let me just unsolo the R track here. If you go within the very audio editor, and I'm going to just do this within the sample editor, so I'll go to audio, to dissolve part, and if I wanted to kind of find the attacks, one of the things that's really helpful is, you could come here and do hit points. So there's two different approaches. One is you can now kind of set your hit point threshold here, where you can see, okay, at a certain threshold, it's going to give me kind of different hit points. Now, if you want it, so as I adjust this, and we can see kind of the threshold adjust there. And at this point, you could actually just create MIDI notes based on the hit points. So I could say, okay, I found where the bass is coming in, and I just wanted to automatically output to C1 and I could add a new MIDI track and hit OK. And then I could have that C1 note automatically be triggered directly from the bass and have that locked up sample accurately. So that's a way of doing it. Some people will do the very audio editor that will give you pitch, but also the rhythm. But the hit points is a great way to have the real bass part trigger the MIDI bass kick. So that way it would just be lined up. So. Okay, we'll do just real quick. I'll do the last question here. Is how can we trigger MIDI to change maybe a snare sound to a groove agent snare? All right, it's a great question. So then after this, I'll wrap up for the night. Let me just open up. I have a project set for this already. Let's see if I have it open. All right, here's the project. All right, so let's say I have my project here, and I have Groove Agent open here with the Maple kit, which has been in Groove Agent for a while. So if I have this, we can now just say, okay, here's my snare. So yeah, I have my different kits here. This is kind of just an old kit that's been in Cubase for a long time, but it works really well for kind of pop rock stuff. So as I'm playing this, I'm just going to say, so let's say, first off, maybe I'm going to select this track, and maybe I want it to beef up like the kicks. So if I double click, I could go into the sample editor, and again, using the slices here, kind of the same concept that we did with the bass, I'm going to say, let's create MIDI events. Let's assign it to the selected track, and I want it to be on C1, and I want to retain the original dynamic velocity. So now I hit OK. And I did it to the wrong track. So let me just do this one more time. I hate when it's operator error and I'm the operator. Okay, so I'm going to come directly here, double click, and again, we set our threshold. And this is, especially like on a live drum track, a lot of times you run into situations where you have drums bleeding. And it's very typical. So you don't want to necessarily have your kick trigger when your hi-hats and snares. So I'm going to say create MIDI notes again. And we'll do on the first selected track. All right, so C1, and we'll hit OK. So now it's just triggering the sample from Groove Agent here. So if I want to open this up. So really quick, if I want to mute the original audio kicks, the 3 kick tracks. So now we're just hearing the kick from Groove Agent. And I can do the same for the snare, which is really handy as well. So if I wanted to go to my snare track, let's say I'll leave this track selected. I'll go to my snare track, and we'll set our threshold again. And then we'll create the MIDI notes, and I'll put this onto D1. And a lot of times this is handy because sometimes, I recently played with a drummer, and it was kind of a rock gig, and he had his kick drum tuned to E flat and didn't really bother him so much. But if we wanted to, just come here, so now I could take the snare tracks. I'm going to go ahead and mute the snares. But I could just tune the snare. As well. So you could just do drum replacement and have the MIDI track and not worry about the threshold hitting every single time, because you could just edit it as you see fit. So it's a very easy way to do drum replacement. So, I think that will kind of be a very easy way to do that. So I see Dennis just joined us, and it sounds, sorry, we're just wrapping up now. But I think if I want to just see if anyone has just a last minute quick question before we wrap up. So, but I want to thank everyone for coming out and participating in a Google Hangout. If you guys want to subscribe to the channel, you can do that, and then you'll be notified when the Google Hangouts occur. So we try to do it once a month. My schedule is very erratic, so sometimes I don't have a set like the first Tuesday of the month, because my schedule changes and I travel pretty actively. But we'll try to notify you of all the different things when the hangouts occur, and as new stuff comes out, we'll be sure to let you know and be here to show it. And if you have questions that you want covered in the future, I think we may have missed 1 or 2, but we try to get through a lot of them. And if someone who's watching this live or offline wants to do an index of the questions and topics we covered and post that for other people to watch, that'd be really appreciated. Thanks again. We hope that you guys are all happy Steinberg customers and everyone learned a trick or two. So thank you, and I'll see you guys next month, and hopefully see some of you guys in person in my travels. Thank you so much. Goodbye.